The Force Awakens was released 5 years ago this month. And yes, the film has been debated and discussed, argued over and analysed in countless ways since its initial release. Trust me, I've done it too. It seems likely that those debates will continue into the future unabated. However, one of the more interesting legacies of The Force Awakens remains one of the least discussed. With the release of The Force Awakens in December 2015, Disney effectively killed the Adult-Skewing Christmas blockbuster. It's worth going a little David Attenborough on this. The Adult-Skewing Christmas blockbuster was a very strange and very specific phenomenon that arose in the early 2010s. Much has been written about the death of the mid-budget adult movie and its relationship to the blockbuster arms race that arose at the turn of the millennium. As studios realized that bigger budget movies could earn higher rewards at the box office, they began filling the summer season with more expensive films. Where could the modestly budgeted adult film go but migrate away from the summer season? While the number of films released each year has consistently increased, the number of those films coming from major studios has steadily decreased. Studios are instead spending more money on fewer films in the hopes of greater returns. At the same time, the number of movies to have earned over $1 billion at the global box office has steadily increased, with 44 of the 47 total movies to have crossed that threshold doing so since the year 2000. It's also worth noting that many of the others, including Jurassic Park and The Phantom Menace, only crossed that threshold in re-releases after the year 2000. Even producing fewer movies, the studios found themselves competing for space in the summer. This is arguably one of the reasons why you're seeing more movies going to streaming after the pandemic, because afterwards there's inevitably going to be a massive pileup as movies are released in rapid succession. After the middling box office for Godzilla King of the Monsters, Warner Bros. Initially rescheduled Godzilla vs. Kong to November 2020 to move it out of the path of oncoming monsters like Onward, A Quiet Place 2, and Mulan. Now, of course, hindsight is, as they say, 2020. All of those movies would face their own release hurdles, as tends to happen when a pandemic arrives out of nowhere and fundamentally changes the nature of the medium. If even blockbusters had to get out of one another's way, what hope was there for films that couldn't compete on that level? For a brief moment at the start of the 2010s, studios seemed to find an answer. Moderately budgeted adult-skewing films could potentially thrive in the Christmas release window, far away from the blockbuster drama of the summer. It seemed there was space in the schedule for movies that didn't need to perform like Marvel Studios films. Of course, the major studios had tried to colonize the festive season at the turn of the millennium. Warner Bros. Had enjoyed great success with the Lord of the Rings trilogy as Christmas releases. Although only the last of the three crossed the billion-dollar mark, each was either the second highest or the highest grossing movie of their year. Attempts to reproduce that success with films like The Chronicles of Narnia or The Hobbit met with only moderate success. Initial entries performed well, but subsequent installments struggled to find an audience. In the wake of The Lord of the Rings, there were winter blockbusters that performed well, but rarely on par with summer releases. The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was the third highest grossing movie of 2005. Night at the Museum was the fifth highest grossing movie of 2006. I Am Legend was the seventh highest grossing movie of 2007. As you can see, their end-of-year ranking was steadily dropping. Other attempts to transplant blockbusters into winter resulted in more obvious disappointments, as with Tron Legacy or Exodus: Gods and Kings. As it was in so many other ways, Avatar is an exceptional case here, storming to the title of the highest grossing film of all time by launching in an advantageous Christmas release window. However, Avatar was not an easily reproducible case for Hollywood, as demonstrated by the film industry's brief and ill-fated flirtation with resurrecting 3D filmmaking in the early 2010s. If you want to get a sense of how hard it is to replicate Avatar, just look at films like Hugo, Martin Scorsese's child-skewing 3D adaptation of a beloved children's book that sunk at the box office like a stone when it was released in November 2011. Even James Cameron seems to struggle recreating Avatar. More than a decade after the film's release, audiences are still waiting on the long-promised sequels. If traditional blockbusters struggled in the Christmas release window, what thrived in that environment? Befitting the season, family-skewing films like the aforementioned Narnia and Night at the Museum films tended to do well enough in the spot. Frozen is perhaps the best illustration of this, its reign stretching from November to December to become the highest-grossing film of 2013. The Christmas release window also became a prime release spot for comedies like Anchorman 2: The Legend Continues in 2013 and Daddy's Home in 2015. However, the lack of dominating four-quadrant blockbusters, coupled with the thriving market for child-friendly entertainment, created a rare environment that could support an endangered species, if only as counter-programming. At the dawn of the 2010s, the December release window became a safe space for the high-profile, well-produced, broadly appealing, adult-skewing feature. The timing was perfect for those films, as it could serve as a launching pad into the inevitable awards season. David Fincher capitalized on this window twice, with 2 of his 3 highest-grossing movies at that point released in this space. While The Curious Case of Benjamin Button positioned itself in the spirit of the season as a timeless, feel-good, family-friendly film, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo did not. While it was subsequently reported that the film made a moderate loss for Studio MGM, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo took an impressive $232 million haul for a $90 million budgeted R-rated movie about misogyny and violence. The film's box office performance signaled that such unlikely movies could find an audience at Christmas, making it within striking distance of profitability. The films that followed would be even more successful. In 2012, Django Unchained was an unlikely breakout hit at the Christmas box office, with the brutal slavery epic becoming Quentin Tarantino's highest-grossing movie. In 2013, the graphic and cynical The Wolf of Wall Street became the highest-grossing movie of veteran film director Martin Scorsese's career. While these movies didn't top the year's box office, they performed admirably, and they demonstrated that audiences would turn out for potentially alienating adult-skewing movies at Christmas. Then, The Force Awakens arrived. Perhaps acknowledging that the summer was overcrowded, Disney decided to move away from the Star Wars franchise's traditional summer release date, and scheduled the first of the sequel trilogy for December 2015. It worked. The Force Awakens became not only the highest-grossing film of 2015, by some margin, but also the highest-grossing movie of all time at the domestic box office. And, unlike the freak success of Avatar back in 2009, this formula could be easily replicated. Quick sidebar here to note that J.J. Abrams does make some small concession to The Force Awakens as a Christmas movie. Notably, the film's climax takes Finn, Rey, and Ren to a forest on the surface of Starkiller Base, where they confront one another in the midst of snow. The red and blue light of the lightsaber gives it a bit of a Christmas shade. This is quite distinct from the use of the Iceworld Hoth in The Empire Strikes Back, for example, but also from the salty surface of Crate in The Last Jedi. While it is perhaps a bit of a stretch to describe The Force Awakens as a Christmas movie, it is certainly aware of the season in which it was released. That said, it's no Die Hard. End sidebar. With its own December release the subsequent year, Rogue One went on to be the second highest grossing movie of 2016 at the domestic and global box office. Fun fact here, Rogue One was second to 2 separate movies in those categories, both of which were made by Disney. The Last Jedi would make it a trend, becoming the highest grossing movie of the year with its December 2017 release, notably the last time a Star Wars movie would accomplish that. The attempt to move Star Wars back to summer with Solo ended in tears for everybody involved. For better or worse, Christmas was now the home of Star Wars, which is reflected even in the release schedule of the 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. Inevitably, the arrival of these box office behemoths sucked the oxygen out of the room. With The Force Awakens, Disney successfully colonized the holiday. Even the counter-programming was aimed at a broader audience, with the slow-burn box office success of The Greatest Showman opposite The Last Jedi, and the nightmarish flop of Cats opposite The Rise of Skywalker. I guess sometimes you do get the musical counter-programming that you deserve. Although the current pandemic has obviously disrupted release schedules, it is very clear that the conclusion of the Star Wars sequel trilogy will not see the major studios abandoning their winter foothold. Warner Bros. Had originally scheduled Dune for the Christmas 2020 slot that Disney vacated following The Rise of Skywalker. For their part, Disney moved Steven Spielberg's remake of West Side Story into the musical counter-programming slot opposite Denis Villeneuve's seasonal space opera. With the loss of the December release window, moderately budgeted adult-skewing films had nowhere to go but streaming. 20th Century Fox would try to launch several such films theatrically in the years that followed. Bad Times at the El Royale in October, and Widows in November 2018, Ad Astra in September 2019. They all garnered strong reviews and are well worth your time, but none of them found an audience. Fox would eventually succeed with the release of Ford v Ferrari in November 2019, but by then the company had already been bought by Disney, turning the movie into a somewhat laboured metaphor for its own existence.
That's the sound of
20th Century Fox.
Out of business.
In this context, the release of The Force Awakens in December 2015 feels like a watershed moment. Since the release of Inception in July 2010, the only wholly original live-action Hollywood movies to earn over $600 million at the box office were Gravity, which was released in 2013, and Interstellar, which was released in November 2014. both of which were late in the year releases. I mean, you could arguably count Bohemian Rhapsody in here, but there is absolutely nothing original about that paint-by-numbers music biopic. It's interesting to look back on a time when movies like Gravity and Interstellar, along with Django Unchained and The Wolf of Wall Street, could flourish late in the year. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to the legacy of The Force Awakens in terms of the Star Wars canon. However, it's also worth taking a step back and looking at its larger impact in shaping the modern blockbuster climate. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was In the Frame.